The wrong trousers. Chapter 1. Happy birthday, Chuck. It was early in the morning on Wednesday 12th. Gromit the dog sat at the table in the kitchen of the little house at 62 West Wallaby Street and made breakfast. Suddenly, he remembered something. He got up from the table and went to look at the calendar near the door. Wednesday 12th was his birthday. There it was on the calendar in blue pen. Gromit's birthday. Gromit took a pen and put a big blue X through the number 12. It's my birthday today and my friend Wallace is sleeping, he thought, and he felt sad. Wallace wasn't a dog, he was a man, and Gromit lived with him at 62 West Wallaby Street. Gromit looked at his watch. It was 9 o'clock. Just then he heard a noise at the front door. There, that's the postman, he thought. Perhaps I'm going to get some birthday cards this morning. Let's go and see. There were 6 letters by the front door when Gromit arrived there, and he looked at all of them carefully. Most of them were letters for Wallace, letters in brown envelopes asking for money. But there was one envelope, a green one, for Gromit. With all 6 letters in his mouth, Gromit ran back to the kitchen. Suddenly, a toy train shot out in front of him. He stopped for a minute. The train went past and then he ran on, back to the breakfast table. There were lots of different machines in Wallace and Gromit's house in West Wallaby Street. Back in the kitchen, Gromit sat down at the table and opened the green envelope. It was a birthday card with a picture of a smiling dog on the front, and when he opened it, it played Happy Birthday to You. Gromit put the card on the table and looked at it sadly. Only one birthday card on his birthday. Just then a red light over his head began to go on and off. Upstairs, Wallace was in bed. There was a red button next to his bed. It said breakfast on it. Wallace hit it again and again. Breakfast, said the red light in the kitchen over Gromit's head. Down in the kitchen, Gromit moved a lever behind his chair. At once, up in Wallace's room, the head of the bed moved up. At the same time, a door opened in the floor at the foot of the bed. The table in the kitchen was right under his door. Suddenly, Wallace shot out of bed, crying, "Gromit!" He shot down through the door in the floor and was soon downstairs, sitting in his chair at the kitchen table. "Well, Gromit, my getting up in the morning machine worked well," said Wallace, and he began to eat his breakfast. "But perhaps I can make it work better. I hit the chair very fast that time. Cracking breakfast, Gromit," he went on. Gromit read his newspaper and said nothing. "Any letters today?" asked Wallace. Gromit gave him his letters. Wallace opened the first brown envelope and took out a very long letter asking him for lots of money. "Oh dear," said Wallace, looking at the long letter carefully. He looked at all the brown envelopes in his hand. "We must be more careful with money, Gromit." Gromit put his birthday card on the table. He played a happy birthday, slowly and sadly, but Wallace wasn't interested in his birthday cards just then. Wallace went to look for in his money box. There was only 30 pence in it. "Look at that," he said, "and those presents weren't cheap." He put his hand over his mouth and looked at Gromit. Oh no, he didn't want Gromit to know about his presents just then. Gromit looked at Wallace, and his ears went up excitedly. "Perhaps I'm going to get something more for my birthday," he thought. "Well, Gromit, what's on the 9:05 train?" said Wallace. "Oh, look, here he comes now." Wallace's little toy train came through the kitchen door and shot past the table. Quickly, Wallace took a little present off of it. "What's this?" he said, and he put the present on the table in front of Gromit. "Happy birthday, Chuck." Gromit quickly opened his birthday present. It was a red dog collar and a lead. "You wanted a collar," said Wallace, laughing. "Here, let's put it on you." Wallace helped Gromit to put on his collar. "Now people can see you come from a good home," he said. "But that isn't all. Come and look in here." Gromit went into the front room. Something stood there in the dark. A new machine, perhaps? It began to make a noise and it came out from behind the door. It was a big walking present. He walked nearer and nearer to Gromit on his 2 big legs. Gromit felt very afraid. Suddenly the thing stopped and Gromit saw a small card on the front of it. "To Gromit, love Wallace," said the card. Because Gromit was afraid, in the end Wallace opened the second present. But what was it? Green and black trousers? Yes, but they were trousers with blue buttons and red levers. "They're techno trousers," said Wallace. Chapter 2. Room for Rent. "I think you're going to like these techno trousers," Wallace said. He put one end of Gromit's new lead on his collar and the other end on the trousers. Then he hit some blue buttons and moved some red levers. "Time for a walk." 10, no, 20 minutes, he said. "Now what's happening?" thought Gromit. Suddenly the techno trousers began walking out the door and Gromit, in his collar and lead, went sadly with them. "Have a nice walk, Gromit," Wallace laughed. There was a sign in the park. "All dogs on a lead," he said. But when Gromit arrived, he didn't have his new lead on. Where was it? On a toy dog. So in the end, Gromit played happily in the park and the techno trousers took the toy dog for a walk. At home in 62 West Wallaby Street, Wallace sat in the kitchen. He had all the letters asking for money on the table in front of him. "It's no good, we need some more money," he said. He wrote out a sign and put it on the front window of the house. "Spare room for rent," he said. Gromit saw the sign when he came back from the park. Later that day, Wallace and Gromit sat in the front room. "Did you have a nice walk, Chuck?" asked Wallace. "How were the techno trousers?" Gromit looked at him sadly and said nothing. Suddenly, they heard a ring at the front door. "There's someone at the door, Gromit." Wallace quickly got up and went to open the front door. Gromit stayed in his chair, but his ears went up, and he listened carefully to everything through the open door. "Are you here about the room?" asked Wallace. "That's grand. Come in." The next minute, a penguin walked quietly into 62 West Wallaby Street with a little black bag. He went upstairs with Wallace. "I'm asking £20 a week. That's with breakfast," Wallace said to the penguin. They walked past Gromit's room. "It's cheap because it's a dark room," said Wallace, opening the door to the spare room, "but we can soon make it nice." The penguin took one look at the dark and dirty spare room and ran into Gromit's room. "No, wait a minute," said Wallace. "You can't." But the penguin got up on Gromit's bed, opened his bag, sat back happily, and began listening to the radio. "Yes, well, that's okay then," said Wallace slowly, and he left the penguin in Gromit's room, closed the door, and went downstairs. With the penguin now in Gromit's room, Gromit moved into the spare room. "It's okay, Gromit, we can soon make it nice," said Wallace. Of course, they had the techno trousers to help them. The penguin was very, very interested in those when he saw them. Gromit couldn't sleep in his bed in the spare room that night because he could hear the penguin's radio. He went downstairs, but he could hear the radio there too. Angrily, he went upstairs again to speak to the penguin, but he couldn't open the door to his room, and there was no answer when he knocked on it. In the end, Gromit went outside sadly into the garden, but he could hear the radio out there too. Very late that night, the penguin arrived home. He went into the house, up to his room, and to bed. Then the radio stopped and everything went quiet. In the garden, Gromit put his head in his hands and cried quietly. Chapter 3. Penguin, that's grand. The next day, when Gromit went to the bathroom, there was someone in there. Gromit waited. Wallace walked past. "Good morning, Gromit," he said happily, and he went down to breakfast. Then the penguin came out of the bathroom. Later, when Gromit sat down for breakfast, Wallace put his feet up. The penguin quickly brought his slippers to him. "Thank you very much, Penguin. That's grand," said Wallace, putting his feet into the slippers. Gromit usually took Wallace his newspaper when he came in the morning, but now the penguin got to the front door and back with the newspaper before Gromit. "What do you think of that, Gromit?" asked Wallace. "Our new friend's a great help," he laughed. Gromit looked at Wallace and the penguin, and he felt angrier and angrier. That evening, Gromit went out into the garden again. Through the window he could see Wallace and the penguin eating and drinking happily in the back room. "More cheese, Penguin?" asked Wallace. Gromit looked away sadly. He went into his kennel and put 2 or 3 of his most important things into a red and white bag. Before he left, he took an old photo of Wallace in his hands and looked at it for a minute or two. Then he put the photo down, put on his yellow coat and hat, put his bag on his back, and walked off into the rain. "Good night, Penguin. Sleep well," called Wallace. Under the cold rain, Gromit slowly walked away from his kennel, away from his home in West Wallaby Street, and away from his old friend Wallace. From the house, the penguin watched Gromit go and was happy. Then he went off to find the techno trousers. The next morning, Gromit got up early after a night sleeping in a bin in the street. At home in West Wallaby Street, Wallace was happy in his bed. He opened his eyes slowly. Just then, the head of his bed moved up and the door opened in the floor at the foot of the bed. Wallace shot out of bed, through the door in the floor, and down into the kitchen. But this time he didn't land in his usual brown trousers. He landed in the techno trousers. "They're the wrong trousers," he cried. Then the trousers moved, but there was no control panel on the front of them to stop them. "Where's the control panel?" cried Wallace. "Stop them, Gromit. Get me out of these trousers." But Gromit wasn't there, and the techno trousers didn't stop. They walked out the front door and down the street with Wallace in them. Gromit looked at a sign in the shop window. "Spare room to rent. Cheap," it said. "Oh, good," he thought. He read more. "No dogs," the sign went on. "Oh no," thought Gromit. Then he saw a picture of a chicken in the window. "Help us to find this chicken, and you get £1,000, Gromit read. He looked at the picture carefully. Did he know that chicken's face? Just then Wallace ran past in the techno trousers. "Help, Gromit," he cried. "They're the wrong trousers." Gromit ran after his old friend. What's wrong with the techno trousers, he thought. And then, in the street in front of him, he saw the penguin. What's he got there, thought Gromit. Quietly, he moved nearer, and then he saw. The penguin had the control panel. Now Gromit understood. With the buttons and levers, the penguin could make the techno trousers move here and there, up and down, and Wallace couldn't stop him. In the end, the techno trousers took Wallace home. He felt very tired by then. Because he couldn't get out of the techno trousers, he went to bed in them, and he went to sleep at once.